Alrighty. Hey everyone, welcome. We'll get started. This is me between you guys and a cold beverage just across the way. So this session is running Linux workloads on Azure. So key takeaways I want everyone to have. If it runs on Linux, it'll run on Azure. Keep it really easy. We're going to go into what kind of operating systems we support in the marketplace, how you can bring your own SOE image, and then what's, I think, more important for Linux workloads, how can you take advantage of the cross-platform capabilities in Azure that you may already be using for Windows servers as well. So things like OMS, DevTest Labs, and Azure Container Service. So just to kind of get a gauge of the room, who is responsible in your team, or who in here, whose team is responsible for Linux workloads? Anyone? So a few, good stuff. So about me, so I'm an Azure technical specialist. I focus just on open source workloads in Azure, so I just work with customers and partners across Australia and New Zealand for running open source on Azure, which is quite a broad spectrum. It runs from Linux virtual machines to Azure Container Service, helping out the app service guys with web apps, PHP, Java. So quite a broad range of technologies and products. I joined Microsoft about 5 months ago, where I came from Red Hat, so also looking after Australia and New Zealand. There I was looking at OpenShift, which is their PaaS-based offering. So my background and interest is really around Docker containers and orchestration like Kubernetes, Mesosphere, Docker Swarm. I also run the Kubernetes and Ansible meetups in Melbourne and help out with some of the meetup organisation in Sydney and speak at other meetups like Docker, OpenStack, etc. Keen gamer, was PlayStation, now obviously converted to Xbox. And I love retro games as well, and I also love Raspberry Pis. So this is one of my many home projects that I escaped to the garage to tinker with. So yeah, finished that up a couple of months ago. It's good fun. Speaking of Raspberry Pis, as well as the standard feedback form, so obviously do your feedback surveys, very important. You can win an Xbox. But I'm doing my own feedback form just around open source in New Zealand to get a gauge of what challenges you might have at your workplace, what problems you're trying to solve, and small number of people, high chance of odds of winning winning a Raspberry Pi and some swag. So let's start off and have a look at Microsoft's open source strategy. So you might have seen a lot of news in the past couple of years, like Microsoft's been going through quite a big transformation around open source. We've been supporting open source workloads a lot longer than that, with Hyper-V's had support for Linux for quite a while, but since Sashi's come on as CEO, is really pushing the business to do more around open source, and ultimately that is because our customers are asking us to do that. And we're doing some pretty cool things in the space. So we're not just paying lip service to open source, we're really getting involved in a number of ways. Some of the big things, so products, SQL Server is going to be released on Linux, scheduled to GA next year. So I think that's pretty cool. If you're familiar with installing SQL, you can kick off install, go and get a coffee, go and get lunch. Come back and install might still be going, whereas install on like Ubuntu and RHEL, it literally takes seconds. So I think it's pretty cool use cases that we can start to apply in the kind of infrastructure as code space. So taking your standard SQL workloads, running them on Linux, and be able to really spin them up quickly and scale out and react to customer demand. So some cool stuff there. Revolution Analytics is an analytics and data science company that we acquired. Got a number of open source products which we've maintained as open source and continue to contribute and evolve those products. something I use every day, Windows Subsystem for Linux. This is about running mode on top of the Windows kernel. So basically we're translating Linux kernel syscalls to NT kernel syscalls. And the cool thing is that we're not doing any emulation there. It is like for like native Ubuntu user mode, so you can go apt-get install and install standard packages. You don't have to recompile packages and services to run. I personally love it because I don't have to use PuTTY to SSH. And it supports native tunneling and stuff as well, which is good. In terms of Azure Marketplace, so the majority of the offerings that are available in the marketplace are actually open source based, or based on Linux images. And currently 1 in 3 VMs on Azure is open source, is based on Linux, but this stat is growing and growing. I think it was 1 in 4 when I started 4 or 5 months ago. And definitely the majority of new VMs being deployed are Linux based, so expect that stat to keep changing as well. We've also got a number of key partnerships. So Red Hat was a big one that there was a lot of customer demand for enabling Red Hat support on Azure, both from Microsoft customers and from Red Hat customers. So we've got some really unique offerings around the Red Hat partnership. So Red Hat support engineers actually sit in Redmond on campus with Azure support engineers. So they're literally working side by side. We've got joint integrated ticketing systems, joint operations management escalation teams every week. So really joined at the hip to provide a better support experience of Red Hat Linux on Azure than you can get in any other public cloud. We're also joining the Eclipse Foundation, so this is about making developers are using Eclipse as their IDE, giving them the capability to provision to Azure and also do things like .NET Core and equivalent, where making investments in things like Visual Studio to support more open source workloads. Also doing a lot of work with Jenkins. So Jenkins is a pretty popular CI/CD tooling in open source space. They just launched some marketplace images, I think only 3 weeks ago. So you can now go to the marketplace, get official Jenkins images from CloudBees, who's the vendor who does the majority of the commits in the open source community. And there's a number of other community editions of Jenkins as well in the marketplace. And we're also going out and making some really key hires in the open source space. So Wim Kalkertz was Mr. Linux at Oracle. Really good guy, really smart guy, very well respected in the Linux kernel community. So he's done a lot of work there, and he's making some pretty big changes around how Microsoft engineering approaches open source, especially about Linux really as a first-class citizen in terms of when we release new features, making sure they're in cadence with Linux and Windows at the same time when we make a release. And he's also hiring some kernel engineers to contribute code to the kernel, completely unrelated to anything that Microsoft can directly monetize, just because it's the right thing to do in terms of contributing to the community and making sure the community is successful and keeps evolving. We've also got Ross Gardler, so he's actually been at Microsoft for 4 to 5 years. He's the president of the Apache Software Foundation, one of the more popular, or one of the larger open source software foundations. He's actually the program manager for Azure Container Service as well. And recently we hired Brendan Burns. So he was at Google for quite a while. He's the co-founder of the Kubernetes project. So he's continuing to work on Kubernetes at Microsoft. We're doing a lot of stuff around that. And he's actually the engineering team manager for the Azure Resource Manager team now. So he's been brought in for his expertise around declarative management and those kind of things to help out with the Azure Resource Manager team, and also things like the cross-platform tooling. So things like the cross-platform command line interface. And when we look at, talk the talk, we're doing, more open or source projects, and etc. But how that's really demonstrated is, publicly on GitHub. So when I started 5 months ago, I think we were under 600 million lines of code committed by Microsoft engineers to GitHub. In 5 months, it's increased to 708 million lines of code. So we are doing a lot more software development out in the open on GitHub, so freely available, contributing both to Microsoft projects like .NET Core and PowerShell, as well as other open source projects like Docker. And I think that really demonstrates the change. You wouldn't have seen this from Microsoft even 2 to 3 years ago. So really significant change around how we're approaching open source. And when we look at how we approach open source, there's kind of four key areas in how we do that. So the first is we enable. So this is really about the Linux integration services, which we'll touch on. And this is basically the Hyper-V drivers. So these are the storage, the networking, CPU memory drivers in the Linux kernel that enable to talk to Hyper-V virtual machine, and also the Azure virtual machine, because we're running on the same Hyper-V fabric underneath. We're also contributing to projects like PHP, Java, etc., to run natively in offerings like Azure App Service. But making Linux workloads run well and run great is particularly exciting in my opinion. It's definitely just a general expectation of everyone. What's more exciting is what we're doing around the integrated open source solutions. So this is where we're taking best of breed open source projects, or the most popular open source projects that our customers are using and asking for, and we're making them really easy to consume. So things like HD Insights with Hadoop, Azure Container Service has Docker Swarm or Mesosphere DCOS as offerings. Azure Cache is based on the Redis Cache project. And a lot of these solutions can be quite complicated to install, especially Azure Container Service. Those offerings are not the most straightforward to install, even in terms of laying out your VM infrastructure, let alone how you bootstrap the VMs, how you do configuration, how you do your overlay networks, etc. So basically, we just simplify all that for you, automate it, provide it as a service. We're also releasing key Microsoft technologies into open source ecosystem. So these are things, probably the more popular ones are .NET Core last year, and also PowerShell more recently. So also doing really interesting non-kind of classic Microsoft things in terms of who we're releasing with as well. So PowerShell, when we open source that, our release partners were AWS and VMware, which are quite significant competitors for us in certain areas. But the reason we're doing that is that's what customers want. That's what you're asking for. So we're really listening, taking the feedback, and delivering what you need to do your jobs. And we're also participating in key open source communities. So obviously the Linux kernel doing a lot of stuff around there. Projects like Docker, there was a lot of announcements and fanfare around that at Ignite in the US recently. So both around what we're doing with Docker in Linux, but more recently around providing that capability in Windows, and enabling developers and administrators who are using Docker to use the same kind of tooling above the infrastructure line, whether they're using Linux containers or Windows containers. And when we look at the Linux ecosystem, like on the left-hand column was kind of, is where Microsoft really played and focused a few years ago. And when you look at what's available in open source, there's kind of, for anything that Microsoft does as a first-party server-based product. There's hundreds, thousands of different open source alternatives. So it can be, if you want to take advantage of some of those open source projects and communities, it can be a complicated way to start. It can be complicated to, once you've picked a project, to get that installed. But we really want to simplify that for customers and partners. First and foremost, by supporting all the major Linux distributions which these run on. Things like Red Hat, Ubuntu, CentOS, etc. But then when we talk about those integrated offerings that we're developing, whether they be services like Azure Container Service, or whether this be as simple as example Azure Resource Manager templates, or specific documentation for certain projects, we're working on things like that as well. So we've got some interesting offerings there around open source data infrastructure. So not only HD Insights, but also things like Cloudera, NoSQL databases like Mongo, etc. We've also got really powerful high-performance compute capabilities. So we've got InfiniBand support in hardware, a lot of joint engineering with SUSE, which is the most popular OS choice in the HPC area, to do that. Something I hadn't talked around is the FreeBSD, which is interesting to customers because not a lot of people use it. And really what we're doing around FreeBSD is it's not really used for enterprise workloads, but it's very common to be used by networking vendors and a lot of hardware vendors who are creating appliances. So in order to enable those vendors to create virtual appliances in Azure, they FreeBSD to run that on. So that was the main drive around there. And we're actually now, especially in terms of the security patching in FreeBSD, we're actually now like one of the most significant contributors to the project, because that was kind of stagnant for a while, again, because not a lot of real-world enterprises and users are using that. It's really a kind of vendor appliance play. So getting into actually running Linux workloads on Azure. So there's three main ways you can run Linux. The first way is provisioning from the marketplace. So we have offerings from all the kind of major Linux distributions, as well as community images that you can provision from the marketplace. The kind of second thing you can do is with Docker images. So obviously you can bring anything from the Docker marketplace and run that up. You can use virtual machine extensions, which we'll talk about, to basically provision a Ubuntu machine, for example, automatically have Azure install Docker and pull that image and run that image when the virtual machine starts up. So really easy to get started with quite a vibrant community around Docker project. The other one is BYO images. So I guess who uses SOE images versus marketplace images? Hands? Who? No? Couple? All right. So certainly a lot of customers I talk to, especially in a lot of my previous customers who are using Red Hat Enterprise Linux, they've got a way that they develop their images in-house, and they want to do that in the cloud as well. So making it really easy for you to bring those images and enable them to work in Azure is really important as well. So one thing I will quickly show you is basically that link. So if you just go to the Azure website, azure.microsoft.com, head into documentation, compute, Linux virtual machines right up the top there. In here we've got really detailed documentation to get started. What you'll want to go in, for example, in deployment. So if you go into the deployment section, this has a lot of information around preparing your operating system, your Linux distribution. To come to Azure, we've got documentation for Debian, for Red Hat, for Ubuntu. Even in the Red Hat one, we go really deep on not only what you need to do in the OS level, but how, command line specifics on how to convert your image to Azure, VHD for Azure, and how to bring that out. So for Hyper-V, VMware, and KVM. So really useful. Yeah, you can just follow it step by step. So if you want to bring your own image, there's kind of there's quite detailed documentation on how to do it. There's kind of 4 key areas that you really need to be thinking about. So the first is Linux integration services. So this is really the Hyper-V drivers. They're going to make Linux run. If you're already running on Hyper-V on-premise, you probably don't have to worry about this. Chances are you probably don't have to worry about it anyway at all because Linux integration services is actually shipped in the Linux kernel. So if you're running a recent distribution, chances are that you've already got these packages available to you. Second thing is the Microsoft Azure agent. So you'll need to install that. Link there to again, you'll find it in the same documentation, drill down through the pages. It's up on GitHub, Docker on how to compile that for your particular distribution. So that'll allow us to do obviously provision, do the network configuration. If you add additional hard disks, it's going to do the configuration at the VM level to expose those. It also allows us to do VM extensions. So this is the agent that delivers us the capability to install Docker or Chef on demand, or even do a custom script, so you can execute a custom bash script, as well as simple things like you forgot the password, or the dev forgot the password, or they changed something. So you can do simple things like password reset via these extensions from the portal, CLI or PowerShell. So in terms of distributions that are available, so we have heaps of images in the marketplace. There's basically 2 different kinds. There's standard images, which might be community contributed, so support is limited there. But then we've also got premium images. So these are like official images from Canonical for Ubuntu. CoreOS, we're using a partner OpenLogic, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So this is where we're working with the vendor to provide officially, certified image, certified by both the vendor and Microsoft, and you get like an extra, more detailed level support around, what we can provide you with there. But we've got all the popular distros, RHEL, Ubuntu, CentOS, SUSE are kind of the more popular ones in enterprise. We've got newer container-based operating systems like CoreOS or Rancher, 2 quite popular operating systems for a more slimline, lockdown, Docker-based operating system. But yeah, many more images available in the marketplace as well. And when we look at what distributions we support, obviously I'm just talking about Azure at the moment, but the support for those distributions across the Microsoft product set is pretty extensive. So same major distributions supported across Hyper-V, System Center, VMM, DPM, PowerShell, OMS, etc. Interesting one there for OMS is Amazon Linux. So we actually support AWS Linux for OMS. So we'll have a look at some of the capabilities in OMS, but effectively anything you can do on RHEL or CentOS, whether it's on Azure, on-prem, AWS, etc. Those capabilities to AWS Linux as well, and support it. So if you have an issue with it, we'll work with you to deliver a patch. All right, so we'll have a look at DevTest Labs. And so Jaron did a bit of an overview in the keynote yesterday. We will have a look at some open source specific stuff as well though. So I've already provisioned an environment here. And Dev Test Labs really provide like two kind of outcomes for you, the business. It's on-demand images for developers. So it's about providing them seamless access to images and also formulas, which we'll talk through, which can pre-install software and code, but it's also providing some control around that. So ensuring they're not spinning up massive VMs when they shouldn't, ensuring they're fit within their quota for their project. So if you've got some objections from like a project manager or a business unit manager around, they want to control the costs, they want to use a cloud, but they're scared of cost overruns, provides a framework which you can kind of enforce that through RBAC. So resolution is not loving life, but so in here we can do provision two ways. So the first way, has anyone used Dev Test Labs in here, by the way? One? All right, good. I'm not telling you something you know, hopefully. So a couple of ways you can just do virtual machines. So I can add a virtual machine. It'll show me all the base images that are available to me, which I've restricted in this demo. So you could just enable like RHEL or CentOS or Ubuntu as a VM to be deployed for a developer. But then your developer still has to go in and they probably have to pull some base binaries, maybe Java, PHP, and maybe they want to get the standard set of code for the project they're working on. So even though they can get on-demand access to the VM, there's still a bunch of steps that they need to do before they can start coding and delivering value for the business. So what's more interesting is formulas, and a formula is just a base image, which is RHEL, CentOS, Ubuntu, etc. Can also be your own image, so you can use your standard operating environment image, and then we combine the image with an artifact. So in here, so on this one, let's add one. Maybe I'll disable the artifacts in this one. So artifacts you can run a command. So in this one, I'm just doing a package install of a Apache server. You can do a Git clone so to the project software repository. You can do Docker, you can do Chef, you could do PowerShell DSE. So some of the things you can start to do is grab your SOE or base RHEL CentOS image, install the standard application binaries that dev needs, pull the code from a repository, and they're good to go straight away. You might also integrate it into some tooling that you're using as well. So in here, so we've gone VMs, we've gone formulas. You can also track the cost for the business owner. Connection's not loving life. So cost settings just give you a view of, you can set like a threshold. So say your project only wants to send $1,000 a month. So you can put $1,000 a month and you can put some kind of alerts there when you're approaching it or exceeding it. And then you could trigger something off those alerts so you could shut the environment down, etc. So in the policy settings, this is where you can restrict the images that are available or the VM sizes that are available. So here you can restrict that. We can also configure how many machines per dev are available, or maybe per project or per dev test lab. We can also do this auto shutdown, auto start, so we can shut down everything at 5. You could leave it shut down until the dev turns it on themselves, or you could start it up at 8:30 so it's ready to go when they come into the office. So it deallocates it. So you won't be charged, the only time you would be charged cost is if you're using premium storage. So if you're using premium storage, you're always paying for that storage, but if you're using standard, you don't pay for the compute or the storage when the machine's deallocated. So that's pretty much Dev Test Lab. So yeah, just a really good way to, I guess, remove some of the barriers from your business and project managers that might be concerned about cost overruns for projects, and also ensuring that devs are using the right images, and also help them get started quicker by pre-installing something. It's classic, projects I've been on, the dev is doing stuff on Ubuntu, but they run everything production on RHEL, SOE, or something. So just kind of avoids, getting to that late stage and going, oh shit, it doesn't work in prod because I didn't, it's not on the same operating system. I don't have the same dependencies. So a good way to, really get started. All right, next, OMS. So is anyone using OMS in the room already? One, excellent. That's good. Hopefully, again, I'm not telling you something you know. So OMS you can think of like as an evolution of System Center. It's, obviously we've still got System Center, but OMS is really, SaaS-based offering, built cloud first. It's all about both Azure functionality as well as still providing functionality to on-premise workloads and other clouds. So we've talked about AWS Linux before as well. So kind of broken out into 4 main areas: backup, DR, and recovery, analytics, and security. And we'll have a look at all them and how they can help for Linux workloads. So the first is backup and recovery. So we've got Recovery Services Vault here. I've already created one. This is where you configure the backup for your virtual machines. Looks better up there. So to enable backup of an Azure VM is super duper simple. You go into Add Backup. Where's my workload running on Azure? If I haven't configured any other environments, but you can configure other environments in here. I want to back up a VM. Choose my backup policy. I'm just using the default backup. It's going to back up daily at 10 p.m. It's going to retain the copy for 30 days. So if you can define any kind of policy you want and apply it. Okay. And then it'll display all the virtual machines that aren't currently being backed up. As simple as selecting them and clicking done. So really easy to get backup set up for your virtual machines. If you want to get if you want to always back up specific resource groups, maybe have a production resource group, you can set policies at the Azure Resource Manager layer to ensure that that group's always backed up. So even if someone has something in and they've got to enable it, you can ensure that they get backed up. Really easy also to restore. Oops, wrong one. Yeah, so also really easy to, configure, and hopefully I got some restore points on this one, and to have a look at the restore points available for virtual machines. So you can do crash consistent, applications consistent, so crash consistent, OS consistent, and application consistent depending on which OS and packages you're installing. So you can think of it as we're basically backing up the VM, but then we also leverage the Azure agent inside Linux to quiesce, the file system, so we can get a crash consistent backup, and then you can just restore that to a new VM. So if someone's deleted it, you can take the backup, restore, creates a new VM. Really easy. So next is you may want to automate applying backup to a number of VMs, or you also might want to automate a number of other functions, whether it's executing a task in a VM. So maybe you want to take advantage of the VM extension to install Chef, or maybe you're using Puppet, or maybe you have a monitoring system that needs an agent, or a third-party backup system that needs an agent. You can leverage Azure Automation to basically automate the process of that. And also you can use it to automate administrative functions in Azure. So anything you can control in PowerShell, you can do a runbook on as well. So in here, I've got some existing, so who uses PowerShell regularly? Fair few. So I don't I don't know a lot of PowerShell coming from the open source world. So something that I personally like is we've got these visual runbooks as well. So you can bring in your own PowerShell script. I'll show you the marketplace as well. But for a PowerShell GIMP like me, I can basically come in and kind of, I can select PowerShell commands. I can drag and drop, integrate them with dependencies, and configure variables quite easily without having to know, little to no PowerShell, and I can get some pretty, standard kind of regular administrative tasks that might want to run done this way. Yes.
Can you customize one of the tasks by adding more scripts or code to it?
Yeah, yeah. So we also, so you can, any PowerShell script you have, so if you're a PowerShell guru, bring your script, just set up, where you want to run it against, what resource group, what time. You run regular time. So I use it to shut down all my VMs at 6 p.m. And 12 p.m. in case I'm working late. So my demo environments that I leave running, I don't worry about them. I know that they're going to be shut down, deallocated, and not running up costs. You've also got the gallery. So the gallery has basically a number of official Microsoft Azure automation jobs available, both PowerShell-based and visual-based, as well as community. So if you've got a really cool PowerShell script that you think would be worthwhile to the community, you can upload that as well. It's a really easy way to get started with automating kind of regular tasks you might perform, whether that's at like an Azure layer, configuring networks or virtual machines, or turning them off, to executing tasks within the machine on a daily basis. So next is OMS log analytics, and this is kind of one of the flagship areas of operations management suite. So OMS, you basically enable it again per virtual machine or per resource group to start pulling logs out of the virtual machine. Under the hood, if you're familiar with open source, we're using FluentD as the project that we're using to pull the the logs and data from the machine. So if you're already using FluentD in your Linux environment, you can simply just point it up at OMS. We can also ingest from existing monitoring software. So if you're using Zabbix or Xenos or something, you can also just point them to OMS, and you can leave your existing tooling running, and we can start ingesting that and providing you more intelligent information as well. Likewise, we can also pump stuff out. So if you want to have your Azure VMs go direct to OMS, and you're going to manage all your workloads in OMS, but you've got some existing operations teams that are using something on-premise, we can pump the data from OMS as an aggregation point. So the main capabilities of OMS, log analytics is log analytics. So I am not a guru at search terms for log analytics, so I'm just going to pull up everything. But we can start to immediately get a snapshot of the events that are happening most often. We might want to drill down into syslog, which is the logging mechanism primarily used in Linux, and have a look at errors. So here we can see there's 4 critical errors that have come out of the same machine on the same date, and they kind of resolved themselves, or maybe I stopped the machine. So you can start to see that data, you can see it trending, and then more importantly, obviously this resolved itself, but I might want to create an alert on that. So anytime that happens again, it's resolved itself, great, but if it happens again, OMS can send you an email notification. It could kick off a webhook, so we can call out any webhook. Maybe you want to trigger off some automation job that you've got in an existing system, or you can trigger off an Azure runbook in Azure Automation that we just went through. Additionally, so you can do log analytics, and that's cool, but we also have all these solutions available in the solutions gallery for OMS log analytics, and these start to do data analytics against your logs. So this starts to do interesting things like anomaly detection, security analysis. We've got Docker add-ons. We've got add-ons for a bunch of stuff where you can get your logs and you can search them and you can create alerts, and that's all really good stuff. But what's more interesting is using the power of the analytics platform to crunch that data and provide you some more insightful information and trending and recommendations around your environment, so you can avoid the reactive management of your systems. Last but not least in OMS is Security Center. So there are capabilities that you can do security analysis on your past logs, historical logs in OMS. Security Center is more around providing recommendations for you in your configuration of your Azure VMs, whether that's regardless of whether it's Windows or Linux, and also OS level configurations as well. So if we have a look at networking, it picks up subnets that we haven't got network security gateways enabled. So network security gateway is just a firewall ACL on a subnet. It'll make recommendations that you might want to put a third-party firewall on those gateways to increase the security. As you can see, pretty much everything I've deployed myself is not best practice, but looks like the Azure Container Server stuff that I've deployed is all looking good. So if we go into virtual machines, so we obviously support Windows and Linux, and for the Linux workloads, we do 2 things. One is we keep track of what packages you've got installed and whether they're up to date and in compliance. So here we can see the packages that are installed. We can go into more detail and see what version's installed, what's the latest version, and then you could set up alerting around that as well. What is more interesting for me is we provide operating system vulnerability recommendations. So we're looking at how you're actually configuring your Linux operating system, and we're making recommendations to you on stuff you've not configured. So here, SSH isn't configured to best practice. We provide the reference vulnerability documentation, but we also provide you with, where is it? Here. So we provide you with the actual commands or files you need to change. So it's not like this isn't configured to best practice, go and work it out. This isn't configured to best practice, go do this, this, and this, and that will resolve it. So really useful stuff, especially if you're an infrastructure team, you look after Windows and Linux, and maybe you're not super familiar with Linux, and you're looking after stuff that devs are giving you that may not be configured and locked down. So that's OMS. One thing I didn't show you is in the backup section using site recovery. So site recovery is really useful in DR scenarios as well as migration. So you can bring virtual machines from VMware, Hyper-V, or physical into Azure. We can also do DR capabilities, and we also support Amazon as well. So if you have some Linux workloads in Amazon, you can hook up site recovery to provide migration or DR scenarios. So RHEL support was recently announced with more coming. And lastly, we've got Azure Container Service. So I've got a session tomorrow afternoon, and I'm just going to be looking at Azure Container Service. We're going to look at specifics around, Docker Swarm and Mesos, and also how you integrate things like Jenkins or continuous integration tooling into the platform. But here are, some I've already provisioned. And just to give you a indication of how complex some of these open source stacks, especially these quite popular container orchestration stacks, can be to configure. Let's have a look at the deployment template that was created. So the deployment template that was created is like 1,500 lines of code. To do that repeatedly, we work with both Docker and Mesosphere on joint engineering to make sure this is rock solid. It'll deploy every time. And as a user, you don't have to worry about all that guff. You can come in here and all you have to choose is which orchestrator you want. So whether that's DCOS from Mesosphere, let's just progress through here to show you the options. So here you can pick your framework, whether it's Swarm, DCOS, with more coming. So the way that we've designed Azure Container Service, so Docker's quite popular, pretty highly evolving ecosystem at the moment. So a lot of new players especially in the container orchestration space. So expect to see more orchestration choices coming in the near future. And yeah, you just select which one you want, and you select how you want to configure it. So how many agents you want to run your Docker containers on, how you want to configure the masters, whether that's single for a dev environment, or you've got production and you want 3 or 5 for HA. And yeah, really simplifies a typically complicated open source deployment, because open source isn't often associated with being user-friendly. I think that's some of the really coolest stuff that we're doing is really making a lot of these things really easy to consume. Yeah, so this is basically what Azure Container Service does. We basically automate the creation of the ARM template based on your desired platform. And we deploy virtual machines, the orchestrator, and then you just have to bring your Docker containers. Cool, so wrapping up, key takeaways: if it runs on Linux, it runs on Azure. We support every distribution out there, all the most popular distributions. We also have some really cool first-class service-based offerings like Azure Cache, Azure Container Service, etc. And we had a look at some of the cross-platform tooling like Operations Management Suite, DevTest Labs, and Azure Container Service. So obviously, tooling that you can use across your Windows and Linux infrastructure. So calls to action: do yourself a favor, win a pie, and some OSS swag. Pretty good odds by the room volume. You can try Azure if you're not already on Azure. You can get a free trial, and recommend you hit up Microsoft Virtual Academy, so mva.microsoft.com. Bunch of free courses there, quite detailed, video-based. I don't like reading stuff personally. Love watching videos and just follow along. There's Linux ones, there's Windows ones, there's Azure Container Service ones. Heaps of useful content there to get started. And don't forget, obviously, the Ignite survey feedback. Really important, and you can win some beefier prizes than a Raspberry Pi on that one. So that's it. Thanks very much for attending. I'll be around, I think we're almost on beer o'clock, so if you want to come and ask me a question, feel free. This is my contact details. I'm around in New Zealand at least once a quarter, so if you need assistance, guidance, just general chat around open source, what you're doing at your workplace, yeah, let me know. Thanks very much.